So now that we know how to factor out our greatest common factor, we're going to apply that to factoring by grouping. All right? That goes as said. We are going to group and factor. All right, so I got a problem on the board. Let's take a look. So when we factor by grouping, when we're in standard form like this, we're going to go ahead and group the first two terms together, and we're going to group the second two terms together. And now we're going to factor out greatest common factors. So if I look at 8x cubed and 6x squared, I want to factor out the greatest common factor here. So 8x cubed and 6x squared, they have 2x squared in common. So that's the GCF of my first group. So I'm going to factor that out. 2 divided by 8, 8 divided by 2 is 4. X cubed divided by x squared is x. Positive 6 divided by 2 is positive 3. X squared divided by x squared is 1. So there's my first group factored. I factored out my 2x squared, and I'm left with my 4x plus 3. All right, so now I'm going to look at my second group. So negative 20x and negative 15. If this first term is negative, we're going to take the negative. We're going to factor out the negative no matter what. So if this term is negative, I'm going to factor out a negative. 20x and 15 have a 5 in common. So the greatest common factor of negative 20x and negative 5, 15, my words. The greatest common factor of negative 20x and negative 15 is negative 5. So I'm going to factor that out. Negative 20x divided by negative 5 is positive 4x. Negative 15 divided by negative 5 is a positive 3. Negative divided by a negative is a positive. Okay? So now we have factored the first group, we factored out the GCF, and we factored out the GCF from the second group. So now we're looking here. So if you take a look, what we see now is both my terms. So this is my first term, and this is my second term. What we're looking for is, do they have anything in common? So if we take a look, 4x plus 3 and 4x plus 3, they have something in common. So we're going to factor that out. So I'm going to factor out my 4x plus 3. 4x plus 3 times 2x squared. 4x plus 3 times negative 5. And I have now factored my polynomial by grouping. Okay? So I grouped the first two, grouped the second two. I factored out the GCF. And then they have a 4x plus 3 in common, so I factored that out front. And I was left with my 2x squared and my negative 5. Okay, there's a lot to remember there, so let's go through another example together. One cool thing when you're factoring to check to see if you've done it properly, go ahead and multiply it back together. That's good practice, and you'll be able to see if you've done it correctly. All right, so let's look at 6p cubed minus 4p squared plus 3p minus 2. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to group. I group the first two terms and the last two terms. So we're looking at this. And now we factor the GCF from the first group. So 6p cubed minus 4p squared, they have 2p squared in common. 6 divided by 2 is 3. P cubed divided by P squared is P. Cool. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. P squared divided by P squared is 1. So we're done factoring there. Awesome. First group is now factored. So then I look at the second group. 3P and negative 2, what do they have in common? And honestly, I don't see anything they have in common, so what they have in common is 1. If there's no GCF that we can find, their GCF is 1. So I'm going to factor out a positive 1. Remember, if this would have been a negative 3P, I would have taken the negative with me. So I'm going to factor out a 1, which leaves 3P minus 2. So if I take a look, 3P minus 2 and 3P minus 2, I'm going to factor that out front. 3P minus 2 times 2P squared, and 3P minus 2 times a positive 1, and there's my factors for my polynomial. Factoring by grouping. Announcement! Let me know if you have questions.